So hi everyone, so today I'm going to be doing an informal test of the Olympus EM1-II and the autofocusing for video. And I really haven't seen a decent video test of the EM1-II yet, so I thought I'd just do one for myself and see, because the closest one that I saw was by Max Yurev, where he did a video autofocusing test and compared it against, I forget what other camera. But the only flaw in that test that he did was he was using a Panasonic, I believe it was the 12-35 lens. And I found that when I use Panasonic lenses on my OMD cameras in video, the autofocusing is not very good. It's very slow to react, it loses focus a lot, and in general, I just can't use Panasonic lenses on my OMD cameras for video. Now for photography, they're fine. But in video, yeah, don't use Panasonic lenses on your Olympus bodies. So today I'm set up with the EM1-II that's recording me now with the 12-40 Pro lens. And you don't really need to use a Pro lens. You can use any of the Olympus lenses that have MSC on them. Which stands for movie still compatible. Because when I was using my kit lens, I found the autofocus was better than the Panasonic lenses. When I'm using the Pro lenses, the focus is even better because they're faster generally and get better contrast for better focusing. But in this test today, like I said, I just want it to be sort of a more real-life test. And what I'll be doing is I'm just going to have a mock discussion about my EM10-II and just do a sort of a short summary of why I love this camera and why I think this should be your first Olympus camera if you decide to go with Olympus. And during the discussion, I'll be doing different postures and framing and walking around, and hopefully the autofocus system in the camera will keep up, because I think that's how most people will end up using it. So let's go ahead and get started and talk about the EM10-II. Okay, so let's have a discussion about the EM10-IIs and why I think this should be your first Olympus camera if you're looking at the Olympus line of cameras. And the reason I'm talking about this now is because Photokina just ended, or is going on now, the 2018 Photokina show, where they announced a lot of new cameras. Most of them, most of the ones making news are all the full frames. Nikon Z6, Z7, EOS R. Then Fuji had their medium formats and their X-T3, which is supposed to be really awesome. And honestly, nothing about any of those cameras got me very excited relative to what I can already do with my EM10-II. Okay, so let's talk about this camera. And I bought this camera 2 years ago, I think. Maybe a year after it came out, I don't know. But I'd started with Nikon. I'd started with my Sony NEX. That was sort of my first real interchangeable lens camera. And I migrated up to the Nikons because I preferred at the time the optical viewfinder. And the Nikons, I still have my D750, which has honestly been collecting dust now. But at the time, when I was looking for another camera, and the reason I was looking was, after I'd collected all my lenses and everything for my Nikon, I got tired of carrying everything around. I mean, if you saw the gear I used to carry when I just wanted to go out camping with my Nikon equipment, it was insane. So I said, you know what, I'm going to go look for a small camera. And I didn't do any research. I just went to the camera store and I said, let me find a smaller camera that should take decent pictures and has most of the functionality that I'm used to in my Nikon. So I looked at the Panasonic GX8, I looked at the I think it was the Fuji X-T10 at the time, and the X-T1, and then I looked at some point and shoots. But then I looked at the Olympus line, and something drew me to the Olympus cameras, and it's mostly that I like the ergonomics and the look and feel of the Olympus line of cameras, in particular the OMD. The Pen F was out at the time as well, which I ended up buying a month later. But I was trying to decide between this EM10 and EM5, and there was about a $300 or $400 price difference at the time, and I didn't see any advantage that the EM5 had over this camera when I was comparing them, other than the weather sealing, articulating screen, microphone, larger viewfinder. All those things are wonderful, but $300 or $400 for what I thought was just going to be a camera that I took around when I go biking and camping. I said, you know, I don't want to spend $300 or $400 more. And I'm glad I went with the EM10 Mark II. Not so much because I saved $300 or $400. At the time, I didn't really worry about the budget for my second camera. I was pretty flexible at the time. But I didn't want to spend more than I needed to for a second camera. But what really, the reason the EM10 Mark II actually turned out to be a blessing in disguise over the EM5 was the screen, the way it articulates. This is strictly a flip up and flip down, right? It just flips down this far and it only flips up this far, which is the same thing my Nikon D750 did. And you know, I wasn't in the video at the time, so it didn't bother me that it didn't flip all the way out. But once I got to start using this camera, I was really amazed at the image quality. I was like, my God, this thing is so small. And at the time I had the kit lens on, I was like, and it takes amazing pictures. I mean, this camera could do just about everything my Nikon D750 could do. I mean, in decent light, it was awesome. And I rarely shoot in low light. If the light starts to get low, you know, I use a flash or I just crank the ISO up. I'm not too worried about the noise levels when the lights get low. I'm more concerned about the composition, etc. But I was amazed. And then I started looking into all of the features, and I was like, my God, this thing does more than my Nikon does. The custom self-timer, the exposure bracketing combined with the custom self-timer. And this camera ended up being my workhorse for my professional work in architectural real estate photography. And the reason that I prefer this flip screen versus the fully articulating that pops all the way around is because in real estate and architectural photography, a lot of times you have to do vertical shots like this, right? Where you have the camera sitting vertically, and I'm using an L bracket here. And when you have this camera vertical, the flip out screen comes down and it's going to be blocked by the tripod for one thing, but the main problem was it wouldn't fully articulate. It wouldn't come all the way out because the L bracket was blocking it. So it turns out that when you're using an L bracket, having a fully articulating screen is very limited. And then when I have it flat up against the camera, a fully articulating screen, you know, you can't do anything. You have to pull it out. You know, it's very awkward. Now, with a flip screen, when I'm on a tripod this way, I can just tilt it up this way and just look down for my composition. And then when I have it on the L bracket like this, I can just flip it up, you know, this way and do my composition. So this turned out to be a better workflow for me in my real estate photography because I use the L bracket a lot rather than the flip out screen. And that's just me. Now, let's talk about the flip out screen and the lack of mic jack that the EM5 Mark II has, because if you're thinking about vlogging at all, having a mic jack and a flip out screen is really very, very helpful. But if you don't want to splurge for the EM5 Mark II, the EM10 Mark II still makes a decent vlogging camera, provided you use an external microphone like I have under my shirt here, and you have a wide enough lens. Now the kit lens 14-42 is almost wide enough, not quite. So I ended up, for vlogging, I use a lot of times my 9mm lens. But today I'll be using the 12mm f2 to just kind of give you an example of how this camera does when you're just walking around vlogging. Now the lack of flip out screen is not as big a deal as you would think for vlogging, because honestly all you have to do is look at the lens in the center, right? Front and center like I am right now. You just look front and center into the lens and you're fine. I mean, how hard is that? How hard is that to look front and center? It's really not. So let's just do a quick walk around, and I'll talk a little bit about some of the issues I had with doing some vlogging on the EM10 Mark II. So I'm going to power this up. Alright, so I'm using the same settings as the EM1 Mark II. You know, Full HD 30p, 60 frames per second. No, I'm sorry. Full HD 60p, 125 frames per second shutter speed. And I think I'm just in fine mode, but I have the image stabilization with digital image stabilization on. So let's walk around, and I also have the continuous autofocus with face detect. And I think a couple of the challenges with the autofocus system in this camera is, one is, if you're using face detect, you pretty much have to be looking straight at it, front and center like we are now, because I've noticed when I walk around this way, sometimes the camera loses focus on me. And you know, it doesn't require focus until I start looking at it again. So I think the face detect has to see two eyes at the same time to really get focus right. And the focus, continuous autofocus with tracking is no good. It really didn't do any better. It probably made things worse if you ask me. But when you're talking and vlogging front and center, the face detect I think works pretty well. I think I should be pretty well in focus. See, or you guys will see right now. I'll see a little bit later. But also I want you to compare the in-camera microphones. I'm gonna just talk right now just using the in-camera mics, and of course now a helicopter's coming over, but you can see how the in-camera mics are awful if you're sort of in an urban environment where there's a lot of ambient noise going on like I have here all the time. But let's go back to the regular internal mic that I have hidden under my shirt because it is very windy today. Yeah. You know, Andrews Air Force Base is just about 2 or 3 miles from my house here. And there's always helicopters and jets and everything flying over, so sometimes it's really hard to do a video in my backyard. Alright, I think that's enough vlogging for this camera. Okay, so hopefully that was a decent test of the EM1 Mark II's autofocusing for real life. You know, like I said, we just had a discussion about the EM10 Mark II. And honestly, if you've been thinking about a camera, not necessarily the EM1 Mark II, which is a fabulous camera, but if you've been thinking about an Olympus camera, this EM10 Mark II is like around $400 with the lens right now. And it's a fabulous camera. I highly recommend this camera over any other starter camera. So if you want to get into the micro four thirds world or interchangeable lens camera world and be small and compact and lightweight, the EM10 Mark II is your best bet. And I'll do another video talking about the EM10 Mark III and why I'm not buying that. So for now, let's end it here. Thanks for watching. If you'd like to see more videos like this, just hit the subscribe button, and hopefully we'll see you again soon.